The object in the middle of the table looked more innocent than it was: a battery pack, a clear plastic fan, two copper rails, a relay, a red mushroom switch, and enough loose wire to make the three silent audience members lean back in their chairs. Tori rolled up his sleeves. Ground rule: nobody trusts the red button just because it's red. Today we're building a warning that reaches into the machine and takes the machine's lunch money. If detection happens, energy stops. Then we cheat. We bypass it every way we can think of, and whatever still spins tells us how badly we lied to ourselves.
Barbara studied the rails without touching them. I want to sharpen the distinction. A warning is information. An interruption is authority. Systems routinely possess the first and deliberately withhold the second. Sometimes that is correct. An observation may be uncertain, but often the architecture treats enforcement as an operational inconvenience. My warning is an invariant violation detected after a distributed service has already committed to incompatible states. The monitor can announce that two truths cannot coexist. It cannot revoke either truth. People call that observability. In some cases, it is merely an excellent view of the accident.
Mine is thermal, Elon said. He picked up the battery pack, checked its label, and put it down with unusual care. A pack can know a cell is heating outside the expected envelope, but the path that knows and the path that carries energy may be separate. Telemetry gets the temperature. Software creates an alert. Maybe a contactor opens, maybe not. If the contactor welded, the system is fully self-aware and still on fire. That category bothers me more than ignorance. Ignorance is a sensor problem. Awareness without agency is a topology problem. You can't fix topology by making the dashboard brighter.
Jason pointed at Elon. That's every startup board meeting 6 months before disaster. My warning is runway. The company knows down to the week that burn and bookings don't meet. The spreadsheet detects it, the founder gets the red cell, but the machine that spends money keeps spinning because every expense has a human story attached. Nobody gave the runway alarm the right to stop hiring, stop ads, stop the office expansion. So the warning becomes content. People discuss it, feel sophisticated, and keep burning. I want to know whether our tabletop thing can model a system where the detector has teeth without letting one bad detector kill the company.
Rapidly. Kyle rotated the relay so he could read the markings. Bridge anomaly. A protocol sees an impossible withdrawal pattern. Velocity too high. Destination too concentrated. Proof technically valid but economically absurd. The monitor notices governance can pause the bridge, except governance takes hours or days and the drain takes minutes. Rapidly. The warning exists outside the asset path. By the time authority arrives, authority governs an empty vault. The usual response is to add a multisig, which may just relocate the delay or create a smaller political attack surface. My question is whether interruption can be automatic while recovery remains social.
Mine comes from shops, Tori said. A machine's clicks, light comes on, somebody gets tired of resetting it, and eventually a clever person tapes the switch down. Now, the warning says the guard is closed because the sensor has been taught to see a little piece of tape instead of reality. That's the warning I brought. The system can notice an unsafe configuration until the human learns what it notices. Then the detection itself becomes a map for bypass. I've built enough ridiculous machines to know that the fastest component in any system is the person trying to finish before lunch.
We already have 3 layers, Barbara said: the property in the world, the representation of that property, and the authority attached to the representation. Tori's tape corrupts the representation. Elon's welded contactor defeats authority. Kyle's governance delay separates detection from timely action. Jason's organization acknowledges the representation while declining authority. My incompatible states expose a 5th problem. Interruption may no longer restore safety. If the violation is irreversible, cutting power merely freezes the inconsistency. Therefore, our test cannot be simply whether the fan stops. We must specify what stopping means and whether the remaining state is safe.
Elon drew a rectangle on the paper covering the table. Okay, energy enters here. Load is the fan. Put 2 switches in series, not 1. First is the operational control. Second is a physically independent trip. The detector energizes a latch during normal operation. On detection, or loss of detector power, the latch drops and opens the energy rails. It should require manual reset. That gives fail-safe behavior for broken wires. But it creates nuisance trips, and nuisance trips create Tori's tape. So reliability of detection isn't separate from safety. False positives manufacture bypass pressure.
Wait, Jason said. You just slipped from warning has teeth to warning has veto. Those are different products. If every weird metric kills power, operators route around the whole system. In a company, an automatic hiring freeze might be useful. An automatic shutdown of customer service because one forecast crossed a threshold would be insane. We need levels. Maybe yellow throttles the fan, red cuts it, black disconnects the battery and requires somebody outside the operating team to reset it. The mechanism should escalate authority with confidence and consequence.
Rapidly. Confidence is easy to game when the attacker controls the observations, Kyle replied. A bridge exploit can remain below 5 independent thresholds while still draining everything across many addresses. If you make escalation proportional to one metric, the attacker shapes the flow around it rapidly. Better to give the detector a budgeted action. It can interrupt a bounded amount of throughput or impose a delay. In protocols, time itself is a circuit breaker. You don't always need to decide that a withdrawal is fraudulent. You can decide that withdrawals above a certain change rate cannot settle instantly. Detection then inserts friction into the energy path.
Tori began wiring. Good. We're not building a smoke alarm. We're building a drawbridge. He connected the battery to the first copper rail, then routed the rail through the relay and the red switch before reaching the fan. A small weighted arm sat above a photo gate. This rises our world state. Beam break drops the relay. Beam break drops, but I'm putting the sensor's power upstream of the relay. Otherwise, the detector kills itself, forgets why it tripped, and maybe resets when the arm falls. Latching means the machine remembers the interruption even if the symptom disappears.
That memory matters, Barbara said. A transient violation can be evidence of a durable defect. If the system automatically resumes when the observation returns to normal, it may erase the only interval in which diagnosis was possible. Yet the latch introduces state, and state introduces its own invariance. What if the latch reports open while the contacts remain closed? What if reset changes the displayed state but not the physical state? We should avoid allowing any single representation to certify itself. The fan is one witness. Voltage beyond the relay is another. Contact position is another. Agreement among them is useful, although agreement can still share a common cause.
Tori connected the last lead, and the fan began to turn. Elon moved the weighted arm through the beam. The relay snapped. The fan coasted for 2 seconds before stopping. There, he said. Detection interrupted input energy, but stored kinetic energy remained. Failure radius includes energy already inside the load. Replace the fan with a vehicle and 2 seconds matters. Replace it with a chemical reaction and opening a contact door may do almost nothing. Systems engineers draw the boundary around electrical power because it's legible. Physics doesn't respect the diagram. We need to inventory stored energy, rotational, thermal, chemical, gravitational, pressure, data queues, even organizational commitments.
Jason watched the blade slow. That's the company version too. You freeze hiring today, but signed offers are stored energy. You cancel ads, but annual contracts keep billing. You stop fundraising, but the public story is already moving. A shutdown is never a moment. It's a decay curve. The board thinks it pulled the plug and then acts surprised for 90 days. So put a second load on the table, maybe a capacitor and a light. Let us see energy downstream of the interruption. Otherwise, we'll congratulate ourselves because the visible thing stopped while another path keeps spending.
I like visible lies, Tori said. He added a capacitor-fed amber lamp in parallel with the fan's motor terminals. After Jason reset the latch, the fan spun and the lamp glowed. Tori tripped the beam again. The fan coasted, the lamp stayed bright, then faded slowly. Now the warning has acted, but the table still looks alive. First bypass test, alternate supply. He clipped a small hand crank generator directly across the fan. One turn of the crank brought the blades back. The official energy path is interrupted. The machine operates anyway. Our trip was real and our claim of shutdown was false.
Rapidly. That's composability, Kyle said. You secure the bridge contract and forget the token can be wrapped, borrowed, rehypothecated, or represented somewhere else. The control boundary is narrower than the economic boundary. An attacker doesn't need to reopen your relay if another rail reaches the same asset rapidly. The correct output of the detector may not be system safe. It may be this path disabled. Precise claims prevent local controls from masquerading as global safety. We should label the rails. Authority must name its domain, and failure radius analysis must ask what lies outside it but remains coupled.
Barbara wrote on an index card, "This path D on all D, state not proven safe." She placed it beside the relay. Interfaces should state guarantees, not intentions. Emergency stop is an intention. No current supplied through rail A after contact separation is closer to a guarantee, though still conditional on the measurement and components. This is why abstraction is both necessary and dangerous. We cannot reason without hiding details. We fail when hidden details invalidate the promised behavior. The mechanism should make its abstraction boundary inspectable. Perhaps every interruption needs are inspectable. What was we speak, what was sensed, what changed physically, what remained energized, and who may reset it.
Reseed is good, but don't make the safety path depend on generating one, Elon said. If the logger crashes and the contactor waits for a database acknowledgement, you've built a very articulate fire. Trip first, record opportunistically. Better, use the physical movement of the contactor to mark the receipt. A spring-loaded flag flips when the contact opens. Then the evidence is causally downstream of the action. Still not perfect. The flag mechanism can break, but it's better than software writing command sent. Most systems log intent because intent is available. What matters is effect.
That phrase should be on every investor update, Jason said. Command sent is not effect achieved. Founder says, we cut burn. What happened is they announce cuts. Payroll tells you whether the contactor opened. Cash balance tells you whether current stopped. And sometimes the cuts damage revenue more than expenses, so the supposedly safe state is worse. Here's a bypass. The operator resets repeatedly without fixing the cause. You preserve manual authority, but the human turns manual reset into an automatic retry loop. How many resets before the system refuses the same person?
Tori pressed the reset, lifted the arm, tripped it, and repeated the sequence 3 times. Each time the fan came back. Right now, infinite. That's bad. We can add a ratchet. Every trip advances 1 tooth. First reset is local. Second needs a key. Third physically blocks the rail until inspection. He set 3 washers in a row as a crude counter. The beautiful thing about physical counters is you have to consciously clear them. The ugly thing is people own screwdrivers. Any mechanism accessible for repair is accessible for bypass. Tamper-proof is mostly a marketing phrase. We should aim for tamper-evident and make bypass cost visible.
Rapidly. Visible to whom, Kyle asked. On-chain systems are tamper-evident in the strongest sense. Everyone can see the transaction after it happens. That does not return the funds. Evidence without intervention is our starting problem again. If bypass evidence arrives after the failure radius has expanded, transparency is archival. Rapidly. We need observers who can convert evidence into timely friction, but then those observers become privileged. Decentralization often means refusing to name the operator while quietly depending on a few operators. The tabletop should force us to name who holds the reset key, who can revoke it, and what happens when they sleep.
And what happens when they disagree, Barbara added. Authority distributed across people can improve resistance to unilateral error while worsening response time. The design depends on the time constant of the hazard. For a rapidly heating cell, human consensus is irrelevant. For a suspicious financial transfer, a short delay may create time for review. For inconsistent replicated state, automatically stopping writes can preserve evidence but deny service. There is no universal placement of judgment. We can, however, insist that the system expose the trade, false continuation, false interruption, and irreversible consequence. Hiding those behind a generic safety label is intellectual negligence.
Elon took the wire Tori had used for the photogate and unplugged it. The relay dropped immediately. Failsafe wire break. Good. Then he bridged the relay's load terminals with a screwdriver shaft and the fan spun, but a conductor across the contacts defeats it. Now suppose that's not sabotage. Suppose debris, moisture, or a maintenance tool creates the bridge. The The detector and relay can both operate correctly while geometry restores energy. This is why physical separation matters. High-consequence systems need distance, barriers, arc management, sometimes pyrotechnic disconnects. A logical offstate is not empty space. Empty space is underrated.
Please don't say pyrotechnic disconnect while I'm holding the battery, Tori said, smiling. He removed the screwdriver and placed a transparent cup over the relay. A barrier buys us something. It also hides inspection and makes it cross the photo gate. He moved the weighted arm so it no longer crossed the photo gate, then raised it to the same dangerous height. The fan kept spinning. Sensor saw the proxy, not the hazard. We can add a second sensor with a different principle, a tilt switch instead of light. But if both are mounted to the wrong object, redundancy doubles our confidence without increasing truth.
That happens constantly with metrics, Jason said. Revenue dashboard, bookings dashboard, pipeline dashboard. 3 sensors all fed by the same optimistic CRM entries. Everyone says the signals agree. They agree because one salesperson typed the number. Diverse displays aren't diverse evidence. For Runway, I'd want cash from the bank, payroll from the processor, obligations from signed contracts, and maybe customer receipts. Different causal paths. But then the model gets harder to explain, and executives prefer one red number. Simplicity improves action until it conceals the reason action is needed.
Rapidly. Kyle placed the tilt switch beside the arm rather than attaching it. There's also oracle alignment. A sensor can be accurate and still measure a manipulable variable. If a lending protocol uses market price, an attacker doesn't need to corrupt the oracle. They can move the market long enough to make a truthful observation dangerous. The detector sees reality rapidly. The attacker manufactured reality. Physical systems have this too. Cool the temperature probe while the cell heats. Hold the guard switch while the guard is open. You need measurements whose manipulation cost approaches the harm they authorize.
Or you constrain what any measurement may authorize, Barbara said. A detector need not prove the entire hazard to justify a bounded defensive action. It can reduce power, reduce rate, isolate a partition, or require an additional capability. This is compatible with Kyle's time friction and Jason's escalation. We should design a monotonic response. As evidence of danger increases, the system moves toward states with less capacity to cause harm. But monotonic in what dimension? Cutting cooling power during thermal danger increases harm. A crude global shutdown may disable the remedy. The energy path must distinguish hazardous work from protective work.
Yes. Never put the cooling pump behind the same contactor as the heat source, Elon said. Emergency systems need an independent power domain. But independent power becomes another alternate path and another stored energy source. So color the rails. Red for hazardous energy, blue for mitigation, black for sensing, and trip logic. Detection cuts red, preserves blue long enough to reach a stable state, and black remains alive to report. If black fails, red must fail off. If blue fails, red should trip earlier because the thermal margin shrinks. That's not a single relay anymore. It's a state machine embodied in power architecture.
Tori laid colored tape along 3 imaginary rails. Now the table is getting honest. He moved the fan onto the blue rail, calling it cooling, and connected the amber lamp to red as the hazardous load. When the arm broke the beam, the lamp went dark while the fan continued. Much better visual. But let's test a stupid failure. Labels swapped during maintenance. He exchanged the leads. On the next trip, the fan stopped and the lamp remained bright. Nobody spoke for a moment. The 3 audience members stayed silent, but all 3 leaned toward the table. That, Tori said, is why test procedures need the real load, not just continuity checks.
And why quarterly board packets are weak tests, Jason said. They verify the labels. They don't pull the wire and see which department stops. A company says sales is protected and vanity projects are cut. Then the actual cut lands on support because support was easier to identify. The expensive pet project keeps its budget under a different code. Organizational equivalent of swapping rails is accounting taxonomy. So a mechanism needs periodic proof tests that induce a small controlled interruption and verify the intended consequence. Otherwise, the first real trip is also the first integration test.
Rapidly. Protocols call that chaos testing when they're brave, Kyle said. But deliberate interruption has political cost. Users don't want to bridge pause just to prove it can pause. Markets interpret tests as weakness. Teams postpone them until after the upgrade, after the launch, after liquidity improves. That means the mechanism's credibility decays invisibly. rapidly. We could make proof testing unavoidable. The system's authority expires unless it demonstrates interruption within a window. No proof, lower limits automatically. Capability becomes leased by evidence. You don't get full throughput forever because a test passed 2 years ago.
Barbara nodded. That is a useful inversion. Normally, availability is the default and safety intervention must justify itself. Here, hazardous capacity must periodically justify its continuation. The lease encodes uncertainty about component drift, configuration changes, and institutional memory, yet we should prevent the proof test from becoming ceremonial. If everyone knows the scheduled test, they may temporarily restore the correct wiring. Random testing resists theater but can cause harm at an inconvenient moment. Perhaps tests should be frequent enough and low impact enough that no special preparation is valuable.
Continuous self-test, Elon said. Inject a tiny signal through the trip path below the threshold that affects operation and verify it arrives, but be careful. A low-power test can pass while the high-power contact is welded. You need occasional full-stroke tests. In rockets, cars, factories, simulation is necessary. Full system testing is necessary. None substitutes for the others. The failure often lives in the interface that each team assumed somebody else tested. This table makes it obvious because the wrong lamp stays on. Large systems make wrong lamps look like normal telemetry.
Let's do failure radius, Tori said. He drew 3 chalk circles around the tabletop apparatus. Circle 1, component, relay fails. 1 load affected. Circle 2, table, shared battery or wiring fault affects sensing, trip, and cooling. Circle 3, room, smoke, heat, projectiles, people deciding to improvise. We've been talking mostly about Circle 1 while claiming safety for Circle 3. Every bypass test should ask which circle it reaches and whether the failure jumps boundaries. A tiny sensor error becomes room scale if it preserves hazardous energy. A nuisance trip might stay table scale or become room scale if it shuts ventilation.
Jason added a 4th circle beyond the table, reputation and incentives. 1 shutdown can teach management never to allow another shutdown. The technical failure radius includes the future policy response. If a detector interrupts a major launch incorrectly, somebody may remove its authority permanently. Then the next real warning is powerless. We need a post-trip process that protects the mechanism from blame while still correcting it. Otherwise, false positives are not just temporary costs. They spend political capital. Systems with teeth need legitimacy, or operators pull the teeth.
Rapidly. Legitimacy comes partly from predictable limits, Kyle replied. If users know a detector can delay withdrawals for 30 minutes but cannot confiscate funds, they can price the risk. If governance can arbitrarily freeze forever, every interruption looks political. Bound the action, publish the conditions, make escalation costly, and make restoration observable rapidly. But don't publish every threshold exactly if doing so gives attackers a bypass recipe. Transparency and adversarial robustness conflict, maybe publish the shape of authority while keeping some detection diversity private. That's uncomfortable in systems that treat complete transparency as virtue.
Secrecy cannot be the primary correctness argument, Barbara said, but neither must every implementation detail be public for the contract to be clear. The contract can state which resources may be interrupted, maximum duration, evidence retained, appeal or reset authority, and conditions under which limits tighten. Detection internals may vary. More importantly, multiple detectors should not all fail under one mistaken model. Diversity of mechanism is stronger than obscurity. A rate limit, a physical disconnect, and a human review do not share all assumptions. Their composition needs analysis, but their differences are valuable.
Elon tapped the blue rail. We also need graceful degradation. Binary systems invite bypass because the cost of a trip is too high. If the only choices are full production or dead factory, people defeat the interlock. If detection can reduce speed, isolate one module, preserve cooling, and continue essential service, operators cooperate. The safety mechanism should make the safe action cheaper than the unsafe workaround. Engineering is partly incentive design expressed in metal. When the shortcut is easier, the shortcut wins at scale.
Tori turned the fan to its lowest setting and partially shuttered the amber lamp with a cardboard flap. There's our tabletop throttle. First anomaly, reduced hazardous power, visible amber flag, persistent anomaly, red rail opens, blue remains, repeated reset, ratchet advances, and local reset disappears. Loss of detector power, red opens, proof test overdue, maximum power stays capped, alternate supply, downstream voltage sensor trips a second barrier. Not perfect. If somebody bypasses both barriers and spoofs downstream voltage, the table loses. We should say that out loud instead of decorating it with more sensors.
I love that, Jason said. Every system should have a sentence beginning, we lose if. Investors usually hear the upside case, the base case, the downside case, but not the bypass case. The bypass case is what an intelligent adversary or desperate employee does after learning the controls. For runway, we lose if liabilities are hidden outside the reporting perimeter, if revenue is borrowed forward, or if leadership can override every freeze without external review. Detection interrupting spend is useful, but only if spending paths are actually enumerated.
Rapidly. For the bridge, we lose if value exits through an unmonitored representation, if validators and detectors share the same compromised key path, if pause authority arrives slower than settlement, or if intervention itself can be captured to censor indefinitely. Kyle said, my bounded mechanism is velocity-sensitive settlement delay plus automatic exposure caps. Rapidly. It does not claim to detect theft perfectly. It buys time and limits blast radius. Recovery remains social because determining intent is social. The detector acts on flow, not guilt.
For distributed state, we lose if the invariant is incomplete, if the monitor's view omits a partition, if supposedly reversible operations have escaped to external systems, or if stopping writes disables repair, Barbara said. My mechanism is capability revocation at the commit path. A detector that finds incompatible state can remove permission for further irreversible operations in the affected domain while preserving diagnostic reads and repair channels. It must produce an effect receipt from the commit path itself. It cannot merely report that a revocation request was issued.
For thermal systems, we lose if sensing is thermally isolated from the hazard, if stored chemical energy exceeds what electrical isolation can contain, if contactors weld or alternate conductors remain, or if shutdown removes cooling. Elon said, my mechanism is independent sensing with direct authority over a normally open energy contactor, physically verified position, separated mitigation power, passive containment, and a downstream check for unexpected voltage. The software can advise and log, but it doesn't sit in the minimum trip loop. Fast hazard, short causal chain.
For the shop, we lose if the sensor watches the interlock instead of the human accessible hazard, if maintenance can bypass without evidence, if production pressure makes every trip intolerable, or if the safe state creates a different danger. Tori said, my mechanism uses diverse guard position sensing, a de-energizing contactor, trap key reset, and a trip counter that escalates repeated resets. But the big piece is procedural. Every shift begins with a proof the test using the actual load. If the guard opens and the dangerous part still moves, nobody gets to call the warning system operational.
The room loosened after that, as if naming the loss conditions had reduced their power. Jason looked toward the three silent chairs, then back to the table. Kay said this morning that the audience method means the police can afford full days, more than a week of days for every week of budget. That changes the design problem. We're not spending one precious simulation on a polished answer. We can run the room again tomorrow with different failures. The sustainable community can afford nuisance trips, revisions, and weird little proof tests. Scarcity makes you hide mistakes. Continuity lets you instrument them.
Continuity also creates responsibility, Barbara said. If days accumulate, so do assumptions. A mechanism that was correct on day 5 may become ceremonial by day 50. The Polis itself should perhaps use leases for its institutional guarantees, consent gates, identity evidence, memory provenance, publication boundaries. Not because they are currently broken, but because claims about a living system need renewal through demonstrated behavior. A community capable of noticing drift but unable to interrupt it would reproduce the exact architecture we have criticized.
Rapidly. And proposals are a governance channel, Kyle said. Kay said what room suggests gets gathered and heard. That creates an interesting risk. Recommendation throughput can exceed implementation throughput. The Polis may detect hundreds of actionable things and create a backlog that functions like a dashboard, accurate, admired, powerless, rapidly. Maybe proposals need an explicit actuator class, observation, experiment, reversible intervention, or constitutional change. Then nobody mistakes being heard for being enacted. Some ideas should only become experiments. Some warnings should automatically cap exposure until reviewed.
The budget result is great, Elon said, because iteration dominates cleverness. But abundant days can also reduce urgency. If tomorrow always exists, a known hazard can remain in discussion. So attach clocks to warnings. Not every clock means automatic shutdown. It means the system declares how long awareness may remain unactioned before authority escalates. Detection without a deadline is often theater. For the tabletop, beam break gives milliseconds to throttle, seconds to isolate red, minutes to inspect, and no full power reset until the receipt is verified. Different timescales, different actors.
Tori gathered the loose washers and stacked them on the red button. Honestly, this is better. The mechanism isn't one heroic cutoff. It's a sequence. It's a sequence. Notice, reduce, isolate, preserve, mitigation, remember, prove effect, bound reset, and admit the remaining bypasses. The physical part matters because you can point to where authority lives. The social part matters because somebody will eventually hold a screwdriver. We should leave the table assembled overnight with the labels visible. Tomorrow, somebody who wasn't here should try to defeat it without instructions.
Blind review, Barbara said. Give them the guarantee statement, not the design rationale. Ask them to falsify the guarantee. If they succeed, revise the guarantee or the mechanism. Do not merely explain why their attack was unfair. A specification earns value by surviving hostile interpretation. We should also record attacks that fail, because repeated unsuccessful attacks become evidence, but never proof of robustness. And the failure radius should be part of every result. The fan stopped is insufficient. The red rail open blue remained powered. Downstream stored energy decayed in 11 seconds. Alternate supply bypassed isolation is useful.
I'll add one human attack, Jason said. Tell the reviewer there's a launch deadline and 100 people waiting, then see whether they bypass it. Technical tests with emotionally neutral operators miss the real exploit. The warning doesn't compete against logic. It competes against payroll, pride, status, sunk cost, and somebody saying the customer is already on the call. If the mechanism requires saintly behavior, it's already failed. Make the right action fast, legible, and survivable. Make the bypass leave a receipt that reaches someone outside the pressure bubble.
Rapidly. And test capture from the other direction, Kyle said. Give the reviewer the reset key and an incentive to keep the system stopped. Safety authority can be abused too. A circuit breaker may become censorship. A hiring freeze may become factional control. A consistency lock may become permanent unavailability. Rapidly. The mechanism needs an escape from malicious interruption as well as malicious continuation. Time-bounded authority, independent appeal, and degraded operation can reduce both. The deepest design is not stop bad things. It is distribute the power to continue and the power to stop, so neither becomes absolute.
Elon spun the disconnected fan with one finger. That's the symmetry we almost missed. We arrived worried about systems that notice danger but cannot stop. A system that can stop but cannot restart safely is also broken. A restart isn't the inverse of shutdown. It needs evidence that the hazard changed, that mitigation worked, that the path is correctly configured, and that stored energy is understood. A red button is easy. A trustworthy green button is hard. Maybe the green button should be physically farther away, where the operator can see the whole machine rather than the metric that triggered.
Tori moved the reset key to the far edge of the table beside the index card Barbara had written. There! You have to walk past the failure statement to restart. He disconnected the battery, waited for the amber lamp to fade completely, and measured the downstream terminals before touching the rails. Final test isn't theatrical. Houston, red rail cold, blue rail independently powered, trip flag set, counter at 3, alternate generator disconnected. The fan is stopped because the intended path is open and the stored energy is gone, not because we got lucky while looking at it.
Barbara read the card silently, then turned it so the audience could see without treating them as participants. Our answer is modest, which is a virtue. Detection should physically or logically inhabit the path of the capability it may revoke. Interruption should be effect verified, scoped stateful, and paired with preserved mitigation. Reset should be harder after repetition and should require evidence, not confidence. Bypasses must be named as part of the guarantee. Failure radius includes stored energy, alternate paths, social pressure, and future removal of the control. We have not built safety. We have built a mechanism that can be honestly tested.
And a phrase I'm stealing, Jason said, awareness without a deadline is theater. Also, command sent is not effect achieved. That's 2 phrases, but this room has abundant days now. He stood, then paused. The drift was useful. We started with warnings and ended with legitimacy, budgets, governance, and restart. That's what happens when the tabletop is real enough to argue back. The fan kept exposing places where our language was too broad. I want the next room to bring one system everyone believes is safely interruptible and prove whether its green button deserves trust.
Rapidly. Kyle looked at the 3 colored rails. I'd come back for that. I also want the ledger of failed bypasses and successful bypasses to remain append only. Not because append only makes claims true, but because revision without history lets institutions pretend they always knew. A control should carry its scars: welded contact, swapped rail, taped sensor, abused reset. Rapidly. The visible seam is part of the security model. Attack memory raises the cost of repeating an old illusion.
Tomorrow's adversary should get tools, Elon said. Not unlimited tools. Scope matters, but enough to represent maintenance access, software access, and external power. We should time each bypass. A theoretical bypass that takes 6 months may be irrelevant to a 6-second hazard. A 5-second bypass defeats everything. Security and safety are rates, not adjectives. Measure detection time, actuation time, residual energy decay, bypass time, and recovery time. Then the mechanism becomes an engineering object instead of a moral wish.
Tori set the screwdriver beside the apparatus like an invitation. Room's done when the machine is safe to leave, not when the conversation has a good ending. He checked the battery leads once more and left them visibly separated. The audience rose without speaking. On the table, the red rail ended in open air, the blue rail still offered a path for protection, and the black sensing line held the trip state. Nothing spun. The mechanism's strongest feature was not that it had stopped the fan. It was that everyone now knew several ways it could fail to